Right, welcome to everybody. As I say, fantastic to have so many people coming on to the call today. A quick introduction, and I won't waste much time because there's so much we can learn from our guests today. So a quick introduction for me. I'm the co-founder of the Women's Sport Collective. For those of you that haven't been on our calls before, we've got lots of new members coming in the last couple of weeks, so welcome to you. And Kate Hannon, who's also on the call but busy opening the door for people to come at the moment, is co-founder with me. So hello to you both. Now, this is often the time where I would talk about the sessions we've got coming up in the next few weeks, etc. I'm not going to do that today because I am conscious there's so much amazing information that our guests have to share. I was very fortunate yesterday. I went on a session they ran on the menopause, which was brilliant last night, and it was just like packed so much into an hour, and I'm conscious we're trying to do even more than that in today's session, so I'm going to pass across to them very quickly. But we're quite, as I say, an informal group, so if you've got any thoughts as we're going through, please use the chat function. If you've got questions for them, please use the chat function to place those questions in there. So I say it's a bit of an informative session, but we're hoping also we can use it to network and get to know people on the session as well too. That's my job done here really for this call today. So I'm going to pass across to Baz and Emma, and I will let you introduce yourselves if that's okay, and I'll come back on at the end.
Great, thank you, Sue. Thanks everyone. We're up to nearly 130 of you, which is amazing to see everyone here today. Kate, would you mind doing the first poll so we can see who we've got in the room, who's actually watching us this lunchtime? My name's Baz Moffat, and some of you may know me, some of you probably don't know me at all. My background is I was on the British rowing team for 4 years, and then since
bonkers. Right, I'm gonna go get a bit of lunch in.
Is there anyone?
Thanks very much. I'll talk to you later. Bye, Dave.
Since retiring from sport, I set up a personal training business, and over the last 6 years, I've specialised in pelvic health. So I really work specifically with all different types of women around the pelvic floor. And over this last year, Emma and I have co-founded The Well with another woman called Dr. Bella Smith, who is a GP. And she works in Suffolk, and she specialises in women's health and contraception. And then we've got Dr. Emma Ross, who is, I'm going to introduce her just to keep things nice and quick, but she is, let me just close this down. She is a sports scientist. She did research for ages, and then over the last just under 10 years, she's been working at the EIS, working with the Paralympic and Olympic teams, and did some absolutely pioneering work with regards to female health, and especially around, she launched the Smart Her campaign, which any of you that's been working in Olympic sport will be really aware of. Okay, so we've got a real mixture here. We've got 22% of coaches, 24% practitioners, some parents, 4% are athletes, and 48% of you regard yourself as active women, which is amazing. So lots of people here here to learn because they can help the women and girls that they're working with, which is just brilliant. Right, I'm going to try and shift that out of the way so I can actually concentrate. Okay, perfect. So what we want to do is give you an absolute whistle-stop tour of where the particular areas where we feel women are underserved. Okay, so we won't be covering absolutely everything, but we'll be covering like the headlines. And many people ask us, like, why did you set up The Well? Like, what is The Well all about? And there's an absolute myriad of reasons, but the two main ones, the first one is because we had to, like, there was absolutely no choice in the matter. Once we'd all come across each other and we all started working together in like kind of little separate projects, we were like, we want to be part of the solution. There's really, really important work going on identifying the problem. So identifying the data gaps, like, you know, the fact that there's not enough research done, there's not enough women on boards, there's not enough women coaches. Like, that is brilliant work that needs to be happening. But what we didn't want to do is just keep on talking about the problems, because we know enough to be part of the solution. And between the three of us, and it's not just us, like, everyone has solutions down inside them, but we know enough to help more girls and women do sport. We know enough to help those girls and women who are doing sport enjoy their sport more. And we also know enough, without a doubt, to improve performance at the top end when you look at how women are training through the female filter. And the second reason that really motivated us to set up this new business was that we were just totally sick of having conversations with people about us being niche and specialized, and how like, oh, you're working in a that's really, really niche. And we're like, women are not niche. What we're doing is not niche. This is like fundamental, absolute fundamental basics. This is not marginal gains that we are talking about. We are talking about fundamental parts of a training program or sport that are just being totally missed. And I think part of the problem is that there are these amazing women's health experts, and there's doctors who specialize in women, there's physios who specialize in women, there's personal trainers who specialize in women. But by having that group, they kind of have, they have exclusivity on talking to women, and we just don't think that's okay, because it kind of then means that other people don't feel they can talk about women. Women feel they can only talk about the female parts of them in private, in a therapy room, in a consultation room, whereas they're not talking about any of the female parts of them with their coaches, with their trainers, with their parents, because they feel there's a lot of secrecy and judgment and shame attached to it. And we were like, no, we need more specialists, but that's not our job. Our job is to give everybody the vocabulary, the women the vocabulary, the people that work with women the vocabulary, and then give everyone the permission to use it. And that's what we are on an absolute mission to do. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pass over to Emma, who's going to talk you through like some of the areas where she's an absolute expert at, so you can kind of get a really good idea of like how the world can change if we start seeing it through the female filter.
Thank you, Baz. Thank you. Always start us on a high, because it really we are really, really passionate about this, and so hopefully that will fly off the screen at you this lunchtime and ignite your passion and motivation as well. So it is my job to kind of guide us through some of the key topics that we think are really, really important when we are looking at active women using what we call a female filter. And so that's not just looking at her as an active person or a performer or an athlete, but looking at her as a woman as well. And so we're going to dash through some of our favourite topics this afternoon. But as Baz said, the caveat is the list is longer than this. And we were just talking to Sue about, we're just finishing off our book, which goes into a lot more detail and a lot more breadth, and which has been a mission. We were sharing with Sue some of the pains of finishing the book, but that's been our journey, actually just really deep diving into a long list of topics where we think women are underserved in terms of their understanding and how we treat them when they are in sport and exercise. So I always like to start with a question, because it's one that we ponder a lot and deeply at the Well, and it's to ask whether we think women feel like they truly belong in sport, because we know that to truly belong anywhere, we shouldn't have to change who we are, but be able to be who we are. And for women in sport and exercise, that means being female, being women, as well as being athletes and performers, and acknowledging and celebrating that we can be both, and we can still achieve high performance or our personal bests, and acknowledge and celebrate the parts of us that are women. And in sport, particularly for a long time, what makes us women, like menstrual cycles, having periods, having breasts, having pelvic floors, even our emotions, they've all been regularly hidden, unspoken, sometimes dismissed in sport and exercise. And because of that, there's been some gaps that have been emerging and growing when it comes to understanding and optimizing these female specific factors in sport. And there's probably three gaps that we've really identified. And the first is a knowledge gap. About 80% of active women say they haven't had enough education about their body in relation to sport and training. We know we get taught the basics at school, the mechanics, this is your reproductive system, this is a period, don't get pregnant. But how our hormones affect us physically and emotionally, for better and worse, about breast health and breast movement when we're doing sport, about nutrition specifically for women and their hormones, about injury risk in females. We don't get taught any of that. And it's not surprising that this information isn't out there for women and we don't know it. And it's also not out there for people who are learning how to support women. So it's not in coaching qualifications. It's rarely in more than one lecture in a sports science degree. I mean, I thought that might be a time thing. I did an hour on it in a special populations module when I was doing my sports science degree, but we're mentoring MSc students at the moment who don't cover it in their courses. So both men and women in sport are woefully uneducated about women's bodies at every one of their life stages, from puberty, fertility, reproduction, pregnancy, postnatal, menopause. We need to be better educated across everybody about a woman's body and how we can use it in sport and exercise. The second gap we see is a communication gap. So as well as not knowing much about it, we aren't happy to talk about it. And actually, one of the things Sue said about the menopause webinar we had last night was that it's very obvious from the chat that when you give women permission to talk about these things, they actually really want to, and they want to explore it. But we're not very good at talking about it, particularly in sport. Yet sport really does afford us the perfect opportunity to speak about it, because all of the stuff that we're going to talk about today has an impact on health of women and the performance of women. And that's the business we're in. You know, certainly when I was working at the IS, people wanted to make athletes healthier and perform better. So all of this stuff has a space there. And we know that having conversations about some of the things we're going to talk about today isn't always easy, because there's been a societal silence around them. People are sometimes embarrassed about them. And so, you know, for the 22% of coaches amongst you, you know, having those conversations with the women that you're working with, for the active women amongst you, having those conversations with people who support you, or even each other, we know that requires some courage. And we can help with that, because we know that having the confidence, having the courage is underpinned by, you know, knowing more stuff and feeling like you know the vocabulary and you know what you want to share. So hopefully we can make some of those conversations a bit easier. The third gap we've seen in sport is the gender data gap, the lack of research. And if you listen to me speak at any point, and Baz and Bella, we always 4% stat quite early on, which is as little as 4% of sports science research is done exclusively on women. And that is a real problem, not just because that number is, you know, shockingly low in single digits, but because 26% is done exclusively on men, but 70%, so the remainder of the research is done on mixed groups. So when experimenters look at the effectiveness of all these different things across sport and performance, they take mixed groups of people and they test them, which fails to serve anyone very well. But it's most challenging for women, because when they do this, the researchers ignore the changing physiology and psychology across the menstrual cycle. It's not controlled for. It's either ignored, or if researchers do say, well, I'm going to be very diligent and I'm going to test women and I know they have a menstrual cycle and their physiology changes, they get tested at a time of their cycle when their female sex hormones are at the lowest point across their cycle. And so actually they mostly resemble the physiology of a man. And so the outcomes of that research aren't really useful to inform best practice when we are training, treating or coaching women. So the work we do is to try and close those gaps, try and close the knowledge gap, try and open up the conversation, so close the communication gap, and to really address the gender data gap, not just by supporting researchers to do more research, but also communicating the research that is out there so people know about it. So as I said, I'm going to whistle stop through a few key topics that are our favourite, probably, and Baz will be contributing her favourite as well. But one of the things I love to talk about is the menstrual cycle. And again, those of you who know me know that I do lots of talks to coaches and athletes, right through to performance directors in sport and administrators of sport, about the menstrual cycle. And actually, I think we've got a poll. So if Kate, if you're still with us, could you do the poll to see if I think we're going to ask you whether, if you're an athlete or an active woman, you've been affected by your menstrual cycle or your period, or if you're a coach or practitioner, you think that someone you work with has been affected by their period or their menstrual cycle, and whether you talk about it between yourself and your, training group or your coaches. So we're just going to have to see, whilst that is in progress, I'm going to tell you a story about Ailish McColgan, who's, as you probably all know, is one of our brilliant endurance runners in England. Actually, she's Scottish, she'd kill me, in GB. And she did a podcast recently, and she's actually spoken really openly, and again, it's really brilliant for athletes to do this, to speak openly about things that are affecting them as women. She spoke openly about the effect of her menstrual cycle on her performance, and in her most recent podcast she said that she was in great physical shape and was probably, I think, capable of running around a 4:03, 4 minutes 3 seconds for her 1500 meters, which is amazing. But if she was in the exact same shape and she was racing on a day that fell around her period, so the day before or the day she started her period, that 4:03 could change to a 4:15, just from the effects that her hormones and her physiology were having on her. Now, that's a huge difference. And she's not alone, because 88% of active women say their menstrual cycle affects their training and performance. That was from a big survey of 14,000 women. And actually, we've got quite similar data here. We've got 80% of you saying that your period or your menstrual cycle affects your training and performance. So it's a huge amount of people who at some time of the month think that they're not quite living up to the best version of themselves because of the time of the cycle that they're in. And we're kind of here to say it doesn't have to be like that. So we've got the evidence. We've got some really nice research that comes out of Nottingham Trent University and their colleagues in Northumbria University, which says that determinants of performance like VO2 max, like running economy, like strength and power, they are not significantly affected across a healthy menstrual cycle. So you have the capacity to perform at your best on any given day of your cycle. Now, if I stop there, people might walk out of the room, and when someone was openly, vulnerably sharing with them their experience of the cycle and saying it affects me, like the 80% of women I can see on this survey, they might get dismissed. But that's not the point of this part of the talk. It's to say that even though the determinants of performance, so our capacity to perform, isn't compromised by our cycle, the way we feel as women, physically and emotionally, as our hormones fluctuate across our cycle, does change. And we know that we have receptors for these hormones all through our body, gut, in our muscles, in our brains. And that means we feel the effects of these hormones being high and low. And that can change our ability to tap in to our peak performance potential. So over the last couple of weeks, on a weekly basis, I talk to, whether it's Olympic medalists or serious athletes or parents of daughters who say they are losing 3 to 5 days per month because of cycle symptoms. And if we add that up, that's 60 days per year. I don't know anyone who has an injury or a recurrent illness that costs them 60 days a year that wouldn't be doing some really diligent work to sort that out. So let's say you've got an ankle injury, it flares up regularly. You'd be having open conversations with your strength and conditioning coach, maybe specialist consultants who could help you, trialing different interventions, acupuncture, massage, maybe some gels or potions. You'd be diligently exploring solutions. But for some reason, we don't explore the solutions to the way our cycle makes us feel and compromises our performance in the same way. And we should be, because there is loads that we can do. And we go into all of what we can do in some of our work, but it's just to say that there is stuff we can do, and we shouldn't be settling and saying that's probably my lot. I'm losing 10 seconds in off my PB. Let's just look at the poll before I shut it down and see who's talking about it. So we've got about 30% of people who are having conversations about it and about 60% who aren't. So, that's a good start, but we've still got a way to go, haven't we? Given that, 80% of people are being affected by their cycle. And before we move on, not to dwell on the fact that the cycle does affect us and compromise performance, because it does. And we need to sort that out. That's not right. We're not doing enough work there. But the cycle is anything but all bad. First of all, having a period is a vital sign of health for athletes. It's a sign that their body is coping with training. They are eating well, that balances that training. They can adapt to that training and they can see progression in their fitness. And yet we know that 30% of athletes lose their cycle. We know that in sport, particularly in sports where you're trying to make weight or where leanness is seen as a sign of successful performance, 30% of athletes are losing their cycle and they don't have periods. And they often don't speak up about it. it's become quite normalized as a part of sport, sometimes even a badge of honor, that I'm training hard enough, my period's gone. And we're just here to stamp that out and say that's simply not true. Lost periods are a sign that something is not right, and it should be treated like you would any other illness. You need to address it, get to the root cause, find out why it's happening, because there will be a reason, and do something about it and find a way to get back to health. And kind of a good example of this is the wonderful Bobby Clay, who actually, I just spoke to a journalist from the Telegraph Women in Sport supplement, and she's got an article coming out in this month's supplement, so you can read more about her there. But Bobby Clay was a promising endurance athlete, and she probably would have been racing against Eilish McColgan right now, except that as an aspiring teenage athlete, she didn't start her periods during puberty because she was training too much and not fueling that training effectively. And her lack of periods for so many years meant that she didn't produce enough estrogen, which is an important hormone in our body. And as well as being an important part of the menstrual cycle, it helps us build up bone strength in the very important years of our life where we're doing that lots and lots. And because Bobby wasn't supported to recognise that not having periods was a bad sign or to get them back, she ended up with osteoporosis in her 20s and is no longer able to compete at the level that she used to, and for a while wasn't able to compete or run at all. So estrogen is super good for our bone health as athletes. And so these hormones of the menstrual cycle are really good for our short and long-term health. They're good for our immune function. And in the first half of the cycle, when estrogen is high, it creates a super environment in our body for muscle growth and repair. And so much so that the researchers decided to look at whether this would play an important part in our adaptation to training. Like, is this a good time to train? And the emerging research is showing that if you do more strength training in the first part of your menstrual cycle when estrogen is high and it creates this anabolic environment that's really good for strength gain, you can actually improve the amount of strength you gain doing that training by up to 15% compared to if you were doing that strength training regularly across your cycle. So that's super exciting because it means we're using the physiology of the cycle to our, we're going to exploit it for our improvement of fitness and health in sport. And I think that's something we've never explored before for women. So I think, that the cycle has powers and pitfalls for athletes. If we tap into and capitalize on the powers, and we diligently explore the ways to manage the pitfalls, then we are really in the driving seat when it comes to our experience of the menstrual cycle, rather than being at the mercy of it. So I could talk all day on the menstrual cycle. I'm not going to. I'm going to move on to another really important topic, which is hormonal contraception, because we know that half of our athletes, when we look at sort of really, good level athletes, we've done surveys across athletes that say half of them are going to be having a menstrual cycle, notwithstanding the ones that have lost their periods, and we need to get to them and help them. And half of our athletes are going to be using hormonal contraception. And this can be as high as in the 60% if you're 20 to 30, and then falls to about 11% by the time women reach their 40s. But we know lots of women are using hormonal contraception, and it's a really personal choice. In the context of a woman's life and her relationships, it's a hugely personal choice. And we're not here to make that decision for anyone. But we don't think that we've considered the effects that hormonal contraception can have beyond its intended use, preventing pregnancy. But we do know a lot more now about how it can affect a woman's physiology and psychology. And it would be remiss if we were to look at the menstrual cycle in such great detail and how we could use the physiology across that, and not look at how the physiology is changing in women who are using hormonal contraception. In sport, it was once coined as a revolution. In at the time of the millennium, a research paper was published called "The Oral Contraceptive Pill: A Revolution for Sportswomen?" ? And it was an exploration of the pros and cons of hormonal contraception for women. The conclusion being that it was probably a good thing for sportswomen to use. But in the past 20 years, I think we've learned a lot more about the impact of hormonal contraception, and not just on what taking the pill does, but on other strategies that can be useful in supporting menstrual health or alleviating our symptoms, so that we don't need to go to an extreme solution, like using the pill, if we are just having some unmanageable symptoms of our cycle, there are more options open to us now as women. And again, perhaps we don't fully explore that or have informed enough discussions about our options when we are sitting in front of a GP or a sports doc saying, you know, what shall I do? So hormonal contraception is a really effective strategy to manage severe cycle symptoms. If you're a woman who's having very heavy periods and it's affecting your ability to train or perform or manage menstruation during training and performance, if you're having debilitating period pains, particularly in conditions like endometriosis, or to treat debilitating conditions like severe acne, the pill is or hormonal contraception in general is a really effective strategy. But we now have evidence that the pill has effects that we perhaps wouldn't choose as sportswomen. So if we use the pill, we suppress our menstrual cycle and we don't have the period to rely on as that brilliant thumbs up around our health, that we are balancing training and fueling and stress and recovery. So we don't have that when we're on the pill. Even if we're having a bleed, that's not a real period. So we take that away when we use the pill. The pill can also cause elevated levels of stress hormones, much like we see in people who are experiencing chronic stress. And we know that the pill can increase the risk of depression. So women are 50% more likely to suffer depression in the 6 months after starting the pill than women who are having a natural menstrual cycle. So these are data that, you know, are quite significant, yet are we having conversations around that, around tracking for those things and seeing whether they are happening and if that is actually happening to us when we take hormonal contraception. And in terms of performance, we have found, again, the research has shown that the pill can negatively impact performance measures like strength, power, speed. Remember, we said the menstrual cycle didn't really change those things. But for something like aerobic capacity, some of you might measure it as VO2 max, we see up to a 10% decrease in women's aerobic capacity when they start taking the pill. And that's in really well-controlled research. And we know that certain types of pill can stop us from adapting to strength training in the way we would if we were experiencing a natural cycle. So there is more to the pill than pregnancy prevention. And Dr. Bella will always say an unwanted pregnancy is the biggest impactor on performance you can get. So that's another caveat. If you're using it for contraceptive purposes, keep going. But do we have a discussion about, you know, what it can be doing more widely than our reproductive system? And the way we can do that is to educate women and coaches and their, you know, practitioners, support teams about the different types of hormonal contraception, which don't have as many side effects. For example, we know that the Mirena coil lightens or removes our periods, but still allows our natural hormones to cycle. So there are different options which need exploring so that athletes can make the right choice at the right time with what's right for them. And so before I stop harping on, because Baz is going to get a go in a minute, I'm going to talk to you about bras and breast support, because I think aside from the menstrual cycle and then the little side road down hormonal contraception, talking about breast support in sport is, again, one of my favourite things to do, because the data is remarkable on the impact of having a good sports bra on your performance. So if you, and I'm assuming you're a woman with breasts, so if you're not and you're watching, just imagine for a minute, if you're a woman who has breasts, you're lined up on the start line of your marathon. You don't have to be an elite marathon runner. You can be, you know, with the masses in the London Marathon, and you're wearing a sports bra that's poorly fitting. And a clone of you, identical in every way, except for the fact that she's wearing a perfectly fitting sports bra, is lined up next to you. That clone would finish a mile ahead. That is how good having good breast support can make your performance. It's an improvement of something like 4%. So having a poorly fitting bra, and we know about 80% of women are likely to have a poorly fitting bra, can not only cause breast pain and discomfort, and I think women, particularly if you're a D cup or above, will resonate with that, but we know that breast movement of any cup size, from A upwards, can affect the muscle activity in our upper body as we move, because it's trying to combat the movement in the breast tissue. Breast movement can decrease stride length. It can increase musculoskeletal pain. And all of this adds up to a significant impact on performance. And as the researchers from the University of Portsmouth shared with us, a mile over a marathon. And it's not just if you're a marathon runner, by the way. Anytime you move your upper body, or anytime you move anything, your breasts are moving. And if they are poorly supported, it's going to be having an effect throughout the rest of your body as your body tries to compensate. So I found all of this work, and this was from the University of Portsmouth Breast Health Research Group, who worked with us on some of these projects. When I spoke to them, I found all of the data so compelling that I said, I think we need to get every female athlete who's going to Tokyo. Unfortunately, Tokyo didn't quite happen at the time we thought it was going to be, but every female athlete to have the opportunity to have a bra that's been designed for them as an athlete and fitted perfectly, because we can't let athletes go out to an Olympic Games and be leaving 4% in a kit bag, probably not even in a kit bag because they never had the bra in the first place. And the crazy thing was that it was 2017 we started these projects, and it was the first time that sports bras had ever been considered as a piece of kit that was worthy of attention. And I can tell you, across Olympic and Paralympic sport, every piece of kit gets the minutiae, squeezed out of it in terms of attention. So the bra had been ignored. And when we were doing projects around getting sportswomen in good bras, we found that in the Olympic and Paralympic athlete cohort, 72% of them experienced breast pain that impacted their training, and nearly 40% were wearing the wrong style of bra. So the style of bra that would give them the most breast support, reduce the breast movement, and then help improve performance or reduce pain. And we even know that a third of women that have larger breasts, D cup or above, say that their breasts are the reason they don't exercise. And that is just what drives us mad at the well. I mean, it's like women who don't run because they leak urine, or they don't train because they're on their period. There are solutions to these things. And in this case of breast pain, it's a brilliant bra that means that you as an active woman can do what the heck you want with your body and not be held back by it. And I've just mentioned leaking, so I'm going to hand over to Baz, who's equally passionate about that, who's going to speak about the pelvic floor.
Well done, Emma. Honestly, to hold Emma back, when we first put this workshop together, this webinar together, I was like, Emma, you have 3 minutes on each topic, and you should have seen her face. She's like, but she's doing really well. So I'm going to be talking about pelvic floor, and I will talk to anyone about their pelvic floors. And to be quite honest, given half a chance, any woman will talk to me about their pelvic floor. It's amazing. I have these these meetings with women that I am slightly intimidated by because they're totally amazing, and then I say, oh, I'm a pelvic floor coach, and suddenly they start telling me their pelvic floor stories. There is no holding back. And to the uninitiated of you, you may well feel that actually the pelvic floor is a pregnancy thing or a postnatal thing, and potentially an older woman thing, but that is not the case. That is absolutely not the case. And there was some research done which showed that 40% of athletes, high performing athletes, leaked urine whilst they were training or performing, which was shocking. Okay, so these are women that have not had babies, they're in their 20s, they're performing at Commonwealth and Olympic level. It's not 40% across all sports, it's kind of 1% of golfers, probably not that many rowers, and then over 80% of trampolinists and gymnasts. So if you are involved in a high impact sport here, so whether that's football, hockey, volleyball, basketball, sprinting, anything that involves a huge amount of impact, it is safe to assume that most of the women you are working with are wetting themselves, because that's what the evidence shows. And Emma and I have been to many a training venue, and we've stood there and we've watched young girls leaking whilst they're on the beam in gymnastics. We've seen rugby scrums all wetting themselves. We've been to athletics clubs and seen runners having irresistible urges to empty their bowels and their bladders, which is interrupting their training. And Emma and I are like, this is bonkers. Like, who's talking to these women? Who's helping them with their pelvic floor? Who's helping them with their bladder and their bowel health? And they're like, oh no, that's just what happens in this sport. That's just normal. We're like, but are the sports docs talking to them? Are the physios talking to them? Are the strength and conditioning coaches like incorporating pelvic floor work into this program? No, not a thing. And this is a massive issue because it is a clear sign of dysfunction. Okay, so if you again change this scenario, and these women were leaking some kind of fluid from any other orifice in their body, something would have been done about it, and it would have been quite an ordinary conversation. Like, it would have been no shame attached to it, but it'd been like, oh, okay, so that part of your body's not working, let's go and get you some help. But we know that of that 40% of women that were surveyed, so the 40% that said yes, you know, we leak urine, we then said, okay, so how many of you are having a conversation about this with your doctors and etc. Not one doctor, physio, strength and conditioning coach had ever been approached by any of these women, and not one of them had ever had a conversation. So we know that there's a huge gap there in supporting these women. And the second reason why pelvic floor dysfunction is a problem is because it's stopping women from being active. So there's loads of research being done into the barriers to physical activities. If we go to the other end of the spectrum, not the elite level end, but, you know, the kind of the more participation end, loads of research done on like what are the barriers to like preventing people from being active. And once we know the barriers, we'll be able to like improve we'll be able to like increase the number of people being active. And most campaigns don't work. And there's been some amazing work being done at Abertay University up in Scotland, which is actually finding out that the fear of leaking is stopping women from doing sport, or physical activity. So we've just heard from Emma about how, you know, bigger chested women are less likely to be active. Pelvic floor issues are also a massive problem, but that is not being talked about when it comes to increasing participation rates. So we have to look at what is actually stopping young girls and women from being active. And I feel that we need to get the pelvic floor onto the gym floor. Okay, I think it should be totally normal for a woman like myself to go to a CrossFit session and see that it's double unders, or see that it says horrendous burpee things and jump over a barbell, and go, oh, you know what, I can't actually do that today. And you might want to say, you know, that doesn't work, that high impact exercise doesn't work for me. I want to have a good workout. You don't want your the benefit of that exercise program to be compromised. You want to work out hard, and that trainer to go, okay, yeah, no problems. We'll swap that exercise in for this. There are so many adaptations that can be made. You know, and pelvic floor issues are so they're rife. Like the official figure is 1 in 3, but without a doubt in the general population we know that the rates of pelvic floor dysfunction are much higher, and we want the conversation to be normalized so women understand that it's all right to call it, and it's all right to start talking about this, and it's also okay for your coaches and your gym instructors and your PTs to also be able to have a really normal, unembarrassing conversation about this, because the sooner we get onto it, the better. The pelvic floor kind of whispers to you at the start, and you might only leak a little bit at the end of a 5K run when you're doing a sprint, or you might only leak during a certain move, or you might only leak at certain times of the month. But actually, if all that is ignored, then it just starts shouting louder and louder and louder. It just won't get better on its own. So the sooner that we get onto these pelvic floor issues, the better. Okay, Emma, I'm going to carry on talking. I will hand back to you in a second. I'm just going to go on to the life stages. So Emma's used a term that we use all the time, how like women are woefully uneducated, and that term comes from a report that came out in 2019 from the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, and it said that women are woefully uneducated about what is going to happen to them, and that is throughout life. Okay, so that's from puberty right through to menopause. So we know that every woman will go through puberty, everyone will go through menopause, and some women, quite a few women, will also be having babies. All right, but we haven't got a clue. We have no clue. Like, until we actually go through it, we don't have a reference point. And because we don't have a reference point of what is normal, we put up with a load of stuff that we really shouldn't have to. And lots of people on this call are super motivated to do sport, but many people aren't. And so if there's any barrier put in their way, they just stop being active, and they'll stop doing what they love. So we know that from as young as 5, you can detect that girls are doing less sport than boys, and they're dropping out at a rate they're dropping out at twice the rate of boys, and that gap is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's because girls are dropping out because of poor breast support, because of not being able to have the right sanitary products, because toileting facilities not being okay, because of being in pain around their periods. And again, it's stuff that's really, really easily fixed. we know when it comes to pregnancy and postnatal that because of these, you know, amazing superstar women, and who are kind of, you know, who are like coming back into elite sport, more and more women are wanting to leave their sport, have their babies, and come back in again. And sport is not set up for that, right? So like Serena Williams's team is set up for that, but actually in terms of sport systems, it's really not set up for that. And they're thankfully waking up to that fact, and they're kind of like putting systems in place, and they're trying to put support structures in place. But actually not many people know what to do with a pregnant athlete. And then also, you know, most of the coaches are males, and they find it really difficult to know how to best support athletes when they're coming back to sport after having these babies. And there's some great research out there. There's some published in 2019, the return to running guidelines, which were just like, you know, very precisely laid out exactly how people should return to sport. And it was very clear. And that's the problem, is that athletes don't listen to generalized advice because they kind of think they're physically amazing. But actually when it comes to this time of life, like, you know, having babies is just totally different to being able to push through a 2K ergo test or some kind of like time trial. And then we get to the other end, we get to menopause. And on the call last night with Sue, and like a lot of us were inspired by like the gladiators in the 1990s, and we've just kept on going, we've kept on doing sport, we've kept on doing what we love, and we kind of like get now to sort of our 40s and 50s, and we're like, well, we still want to be doing stuff, but the world of sport's not set up for us, the world of fitness isn't set up for us, and we've got this changing body and we don't really know what to do with it. And it's, you know, we have to look after these fit, active menopausal women, because they're going to be living for another 40 or 50 years. And it's really important that sport like keeps them in, exercise keeps them in, and keeps training them hard. Like these women have to be trained hard, but in a way that is like, that we have health and performance sitting alongside each other, which we believe is totally possible. Okay, Emma, over to you.
Totally possible. It's totally possible, everybody. Because we have people question that. They say, well, you know, if I'm going to be really good at performing, and actually you can walk along the cliff edge of health and performance, but you've got to do enough to stay up there. Baz is giving me the look of like my internet is a bit dodgy. Is it okay? Perfect. I always get worried. The kids might have suddenly gone into Minecraft or something. So I'm going to kind of wrap it all up and kind of walk through what it looks like to train like women, or to be in a sport or a club where women train like women. And like Baz said, and I said at the beginning, we haven't had a chance to touch on all of the topics, but you've heard some of the highlights there about what we could do better. And I used to go around to Olympic and Paralympic sports and do this sort of education, because a few years ago we knew that we weren't serving our female athletes well enough in terms of education and their coaches being able to support them as women. And so whilst we did that, we asked 75 coaches and practitioners of some of our most successful sports and said, what would it take for you to be able to do better in supporting the female athletes in your sport and under your care? And the top thing they said was education, more education of practitioners, education of coaches, education of athletes. For some NGBs, it included education of parents and volunteers, but you get the gist, right? Everyone felt they wanted and needed to know more. And I think one of the interesting things that's come out of some of the webinars that we've been doing recently is that sometimes the men in sport think that the women and the girls know all this stuff because like it's our body, right? But it's like saying to you, well, I wouldn't trust, you've got a brain, but I wouldn't trust you to do brain surgery on me. No one knows this stuff. And, you know, all the women are saying, wow, I've never heard of this before. The girls are saying, thank you for telling me. And so the women don't know and the guys don't know. So education is needed all around. And that's a really good way for us to move forward, is for everyone to have a better understanding so that they're taking a step in the right direction. And I'll use a case study of an NGB we're working with at the moment. We started using webinars like this one to educate their athletes and coaches and their support staff about the key topics that we've covered now here today, but also more widely in some of our work. and giving them time to explore what that meant in the context of their sport and the women they work with. Because one thing you can be guaranteed is that however much you learn from us, you'll go out and you'll speak to the women you work with, or if you're a woman, your training partners, and suddenly you'll go, oh gosh, that wasn't in the webinar, and you need to come back and kind of revisit some of the stuff. So we start off exploring in the context of those people's lives, which is really important. And then actually, the club that I'm talking about now, they selected some female athlete ambassadors, so practitioners and athletes who wanted to delve deeper and learn more. And they went on our online courses, actually, which gave them many more tools to be able to support the people around them. And actually, that also led them to saying, this isn't a one-off webinar. This isn't a one-off, this year we'll do female athlete. This is a sustainable cultural shift. And we need to be doing this, all the time and embedding it so that it becomes intuitive. I always say we want this stuff to be intuitive, but at the beginning, we need to shine a light on it and make it, it feels kind of like in your face and we're talking about it explicitly. But over time, it can become an intuitive way of how we train as women or as how we support women. In this club that I'm using as an example, we actually used what we call our Act Braver framework, because we know that having these conversations can be hard and difficult, and to get started is quite tricky. People think they might come across as insensitive or inappropriate. People haven't got the confidence. So we've created this framework because we know that people need help, and to allow them to have boundaries of those conversations, to keep it in a space which is about health and performance and doesn't seem inappropriate, to have the confidence to know what to say and how to say it. And that's really helpful, because often that's what people need. They need a nudge to make that first step about opening up the conversation. And then a lot of the time, once you've got a bit of knowledge, you've got the confidence to use it, you can go out there and make some really brilliant changes for the better. I mean, one of the lowest hanging fruits we always see in sport when we go to the venues or the clubs is the toilets. So you might find that one toilet has a sanitary bin in where women can put their period products, and so poor women who are having their period at that time are all queuing outside it when they're away match to this particular venue or whatever. We encourage sports to take a walk through their facilities and say, are these facilities suitable and kind of friendly for people who are trying to manage periods? Because when you're working with women, there will be people there who are having a period. So do they have sanitary bins to get rid of period products, and do they have period products in the toilet? And people say, oh, free period products, we don't have enough money for that. And it's really not an expensive move. In Scotland now, it's actually mandatory. A law has been passed. But if you're dealing with women, whether they're elite sportswomen or they're just recreationally active, like Baz was saying, if you give them a barrier or a reason to fill their headspace with anxiety about, oh, geez, what if I come on my period when I'm at training, or what if I need to change my period product and I don't have one, I've forgotten it, or it's in my kit bag over the other side of the playing fields. Remove all of that and just put period products in the toilets. Give the girls shorts that aren't white so they don't worry about leaking. There are easy things we can do to make our spaces and our facilities and how we go about sport far less anxiety inducing for girls and women, because we just alleviate that time when they're on their period being anxious. The club that I'm using as an example here started using things like a female-centric health screen, which included understanding menstrual health, breast health, whether these women had the right bra and having any breast health issues, pelvic health, did they leak? And from that, they got really important information from women so that they could then provide support when women were having troublesome cycle symptoms, whether they had irregular or absent cycles, whether they had breast pain, whether they had pelvic health issues. They could support them. And when they couldn't provide the expertise they needed to support them, they could signpost them, whether that was a women's health physio who could help with pelvic floor, nutritionist, gynecologist, things like that. So, creating a way to know about female health in your sport and then knowing what to do with that information is really important. Getting athletes to track their menstrual cycle. We know that things like injury can be linked to menstrual cycle. We know that some of the things we talked about today, like pelvic health and urinary stress incontinence, might be linked to the cycle. But we will never know about that if we don't get athletes to monitor their cycle and share that information with us. we talked about how the menstrual cycle can be used to improve strength gains. We won't ever be able to do that if we don't start monitoring cycles and getting girls to share that information when it's appropriate. And by the way, you can't point a finger at your athletes if you're a coach and say, track your cycle. It's intimate information. So you have to create a culture where women feel safe to share that information with you, and not to be judged, and to be able to say, how can we work with it to make your performance or your health better? We've worked with clubs who have got all of their athletes a bra fit with experts once a season. We've had clubs who, although their team are sponsored and they get given a generic crop top as their bra, which comes in a small, medium or large, they've said, now we know that might not be good enough. Can we get every girl in the best bra that they should be in? And if it comes from a sponsor, fine. If it doesn't, that's also fine, because underwear is actually excluded from that contract. We know sports who are doing a really good job of preventing injury in their athletes. We haven't covered this, but female athletes are 4.5 times more likely to suffer a non-contact ACL injury. It's been described as an epidemic in women's football. But are we doing enough to prevent these athletes getting injured? Because loads of the risk factors are modifiable. We can do something about it. So we've seen clubs who are really proactive about that, and it actually makes a difference to how many athletes they lose to injury throughout the season. So the changes we have to make, whether we're in a club or whether we're just thinking about ourselves as active women, the changes we have to make are just about looking at our performance and our health through a female filter. They do not have to compromise high performance. Small changes can make a huge difference. Even just changing a culture to be supportive, empathetic, non-judgmental can make a huge difference emotionally and culturally to the women in your sport, so that we can create a space where where women really belong. And my final word, because I know Baz is going to say, we've got questions, is just to say we can't leave this all up to women. We can't say that, oh, okay, so if women understand their bodies, they can come and tell us what they need in sport. In sport, we've done a really good job in other areas of saying, if someone is pursuing an audacious goal in sport or physical activity or in exercise, but a lot of the time in sport, they might not be the best judge of them. And, Baz has been an elite rower and she's put her body on the line. And, if you had said, would you sacrifice 3 years of periods for an Olympic medal? She'd say, yeah. But we know that's absolutely terrible for her long-term health, and she might never have got to the podium because she would have been injured beforehand. So just like we have rules around concussion, where if a rugby player gets concussed, we do not let them run back on the field 5 minutes later. There is guidance around that. We have to have that sort of guidance and support for women as well in sport that says, as a system, we are going to support you and nurture your health, as well as empowering you to do the same. So it has to be everyone on this journey, not just the women themselves. There you go. We made it.
Well done, Emma. And I'm just picking up on all the comments, and there's a lot of comments saying, God, we've just accepted that less girls do sport and the dropout rates are so high. There's PE teachers on here saying that the rate's dropping out at years 8 and 9. And I think that's because we need to shift, we need to move the conversation on. Okay, so when I was an athlete, and still very much so in female sport, it's all about equality. It's about us being the same as men. So when I was an athlete, we wanted the same type of hotels when we were on training camp. We wanted the same budget for coaches, the same money for our boats. But by doing that, it's like we are the same as men, and we lost the female parts. So we need to move that conversation on now and say, right, it's not about equality in terms of women having the same as the guys. We actually have to, looping this right back up to the start where Emma said we have to belong in sport. Right now, the female part of being an athlete does not belong in sport, and that is what we are really here to do. And it's just so amazing to see all the comments coming through saying, get this into schools, we want this in netball, rugby, anyone here on rugby that wants to talk about this, because that's what we're doing. We are talking with national governing bodies, we're talking with schools, we're talking with everyone, because we want to we want everyone to have permission to be able to talk about this. All right, I think we've got 5 minutes to answer some questions. Emma, have you spotted anything that you
gosh, I was just scrolling through and looking at all of the ones that said, can we get this in? And I think that, that's part of the challenge now, is that sometimes when we open up this box of information, The knowing what to do with it and knowing the first step is really hard. So, you know, we can help you with that, but also know that it's not, you don't have to do it all tomorrow, but you know, how brilliant to create a sustainable and strategic change in your sports over time.
Can I summarise a few of the questions, and just to say, like, a few of them around what would be the biggest thing? What's the biggest thing we can do away from this call to go and make a difference if we wanted to?
Education. When we went out and we asked we asked 75 coaches in the top sports in this country what would make the biggest difference in their sport, it was like education. You need to educate your athletes and you need to educate your coaches.
And the most questions we get are about, is this normal? You know, is it normal that my daughter stopped her periods, or is it normal that, you know, she's been injured so much? And so knowing normal and what's not normal is just fundamental to improving women's health and performance in sport, and that comes with this education piece.
And how do we get more men involved in this conversation, be they coaches, leaders, etc.?
We've spent a lot of time on the language that we use, and we can be quite angry and quite passionate, but it's very important to us that it's not their fault. It's not as though all the guys have gone away and said, let's create a system which we don't cater for women at all. It's just kind of been what has happened. So it's really, really important to provide a non-judgmental space for everybody. So for the coaches to like have mentors and support, so they go, I don't know how to have this conversation. How on earth can I use this vocabulary? How can I make sure that the whole of my under 15s team are wearing a sports bra without coming across as being dodgy? And they need to have a space where they can kind of work that out too. But you can do it, and it's tough, but there are guys that come along, but it's acknowledging that this is really, really hard, and not shaming them either.
I'm very proud that we always finish on time, but how can people find you and follow up? And we'll send more information too, but just a little close in terms of where people can go to and what more they can find from The Well.
Yeah, so our website is thewell-hq.com, and we have a book coming out end of April. We run regular webinars on specific topics, lots of which we've covered tonight, but we take a deep dive into those topics. And then we also do educational courses aimed at practitioners, so those who are qualified to do their jobs, aimed at athletes, and then aimed at the more sort of volunteer part-time coaches. And we're having quite big conversations with some governing bodies about, okay, we need to get you in and all over this. So like, you know, we do brand work and corporate work and governing body stuff too.
Marvellous. Thank you. I hate to cut you short because we could be here all afternoon, but thank you so much to Baz and Emma. Thank you to everyone who's attended. It just feels like there's not enough time, but that was just fantastic, and we'll definitely share more information. Hopefully it's just the start of the conversation, such an important conversation.
Brilliant.
Thanks, Sue. Thanks, Kate.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.